When you're thinking about media coverage of a controversial issue, you first have to think about whether you're talking about a human interest story or a hard news story. If what you're thinking about is how the news covers a controversial topic, then you have to think about why are they apparently perhaps looking biased in this coverage. And it may be because the things that news covers are things out of the ordinary. So news would cover a fire, news would cover an emergency, news would cover changes in a law, news would cover promotions of people. News doesn't cover generally things that go on in everyday life, things that happen that are calm, things that are non-controversial. That often doesn't fit into the concept of what is news. On the other hand, you may think of doing human interest stories as not being news. So human interest stories could cover things that happen in daily life, things that are not controversial, just the way people get along and society gets along. So if you're trying to evaluate, is media coverage of a topic biased or not biased, be sure that you're considering whether or not it's news coverage or whether or not it's just plain human interest coverage. Because human interest coverage would have a bias. News coverage should not have a bias. News coverage should just relate the facts of what's going on and put it in context for the audience. So when you're talking about the issue of abortion, which is the one that was brought up today, and you're thinking about is news coverage of abortion biased, think about what about the abortion issue constitutes news. It would be something happening outside a provider clinic. It would be changes to the law. It would be what are doctors saying now? What are lawyers saying now? What are people saying about it that's a controversial discussion in a public forum? So that's what news coverage is. The news coverage should not be biased. It should merely report what's going on and then put it in context for the audience about who identify the people and what the impact of what they're doing or saying is. On the other side, you could present human interest stories about why are these people picketing this clinic? What's their motivation for it? What do they really feel? What do adoptees feel if their parents didn't get an abortion and they were born? How do they feel about that? What does a birth father feel about when they meet their child later in life? You know, those would be human interest stories about the topic of abortion, potentially. So I think you have to put the media coverage in context itself of whether it's a human interest kind of non-hard news story or whether it's a hard news story. That, to me, is the difference in evaluating whether abortion coverage or pro-life, pro-choice coverage is biased.